In medio stat virtus is a Latin phrase that essentially praises balance. Virtue lies in the middle, but in this case, we're not talking about virtue, we're talking about truth. And by truth, we mean something related to reality. So by modifying that saying, one could say in medio stat veritas, the truth lies in the middle. In the case at hand, today there are actually opposing positions that hardly find a point of balance. And so, in the end, I will leave it to you to judge what will be presented, the different positions, the different opinions, on facts that diverge and never converge. Today we are talking about the only personal prelature within the Roman Catholic Church. Today we are talking about an institution that has been called the White Freemasonry or the Pope's White Sect. Today we are talking about Opus Dei. Stat virtus is a Latin phrase that basically praises balance. Virtue lies in the middle, but in this case, we're not talking about virtue, we're talking about truth. And by truth, we mean something related to reality. As many of you probably already know, especially those who have been following us for a long time, for the historiographical research at the foundation of our channel's work, we at Dentro la Storia rely on ourselves. We often use sources that are not accessible from Italian servers. You can't talk about Opus Dei without starting to talk about its creator, its founder, can you? José María Escrivá de Balaguer, a Spanish priest, a clergyman who in 1928 founded this new congregation. He was only 26 years old at the time, José María Escrivá de Balaguer. But his path is already well defined. His path is already very clear. Spain at the beginning of the 20th century is still a very backward country, a country torn by social struggles, a country that emerged from the Spanish-American War of 1898-1902 deeply disillusioned. It is a country where the monarchy in the early 20th century still holds strong power but struggles to assert it. This power ideally relies on two pillars, the great landowning nobility and the Catholic Church, both possessing immense wealth. Then there is the mass, the people, especially the peasant people. Spain is a strongly agrarian country. From these upheavals, from these social and other problems, will come the revolution that will lead to the expulsion of King Alfonso and the creation of the Spanish Republic. But we have already talked about this in the mini-series dedicated to the Spanish Civil War, which I invite you to watch again on our channel. Let's stay focused on Spanish society. Let's begin. As we said, this backward society is still anchored to a feudal past. It's a society in which the Catholic clergy still has a strong, very strong hold over the population. It is in this environment that José María Escrivá de Balaguer grows up. He grows up in a strongly Catholic family in Huesca, Spain, and in this family. From this family, he receives approval to enter the seminary and later to be ordained as a priest, which takes place on December 20, 1924. At 22 years old, the young Escrivá de Balaguer studies theology and settles in Zaragoza, one of the main centers of Catholic spirituality in Spain. But it is in Madrid that Escrivá de Balaguer takes his first concrete steps toward what will become the creation of Opus Dei. In the Iberian capital, the founder of Opus goes to study law at the Central University. He does this because he needs to grow in his own path and not just be a simple country curate, but also to have the opportunity to improve his position in the hierarchy and even to make a career within the institution, especially in the training of young people. And it was precisely in Madrid that, according to the biographies, Escrivá de Balaguer had the inspiration which came during a prayer ritual to create Opus Dei on October 2nd, 1928. A few years later, as mentioned, the revolution began, ending the monarchy and starting the republic, which brought troubles for Escrivá de Balaguer. Trouble because not only does the Spanish Republic present itself as a model of a secular state, so detached from the old feudal and monarchical remnants that wove strong ties with Catholicism and, above all, with religious institutions. Trouble because the labor movements, the peasant movements, demand the expropriation of land owned by the clergy, They storm the monasteries. They take a revenge they had been waiting for centuries, centuries and centuries of oppression that are repaid with a season of violence. One thing must be said about Escrivá. Like his family, and like much of the Catholic clergy of the time, his political beliefs are firmly conservative, maybe even something more possibly nationalist. Of course, other collaborators of his would later say that it's absolutely not true that Escrivá de Balaguer shunned Francoism or Nazism. But as mentioned earlier, where does the truth lie? Perhaps it's in the middle. Because on one hand, there are the accusations of having supported the Francoists at the time of the coup. In July 1936, of having blessed, together with other priests, the troops of the Caudillo. Francisco Franco of having escaped capture by the Republican Guard several times, even disguising himself as a woman. And on the other hand, there are the words of Escrivá's successors at the head of Opus, starting with Álvaro del Portillo, who label everything as lies and slander. They say that Escrivá would have condemned Hitler, that he would have condemned fascism. But where is the truth? The truth, if we look at history, is twofold. Let's look at Opus Dei, which slowly established itself in Spain. The days, months, and years of the Civil War are very difficult for everyone. And it's certainly not surprising that during that period, the Obra, as it's informally called, grew very, very little. Growth, on the other hand, appears from the mid-1940s. It's the period when the Francoist regime, through its own political police, drafts reports on the Obra, which are highly critical. Some members are arrested, but after a while they're released. Why does the Francoist police act this way? Because it's a dictatorship, and that's how dictatorships behave. Anything that is not under the direct control of the dictator and his trusted subordinates is suspicious and can be risky. But it should also be said that within a few years, as many as 8 members of Opus Dei would become part of the government cabinets of Franco and his collaborators. Some of these technocrats would be among the architects of the so-called Spanish economic miracle of the 1960s, a prosperous time driven by foreign trade and industry orders. So I return to that question. Where is the truth? Was Opus anti-Franco, or did it support Francoism? Or maybe the truth is in the middle? That is, at first, Opus was viewed with suspicion by the regime, but then the regime itself realized there was an affinity between itself and the aims of Opus. And so it made use of it, and in turn the Obra made use of the Francoist regime. Perhaps this is the most accurate opinion between the two extremes. As mentioned earlier, maybe we should seek the truth. But let's go back to Escrivá. Escrivá, who leaves Spain, suffers, it's said, from epilepsy. He certainly suffers from ailments. He moves to Italy and then returns to Spain. During his time in Italy, Escrivá introduces the Obra to the pontiff, then Pius XII, who, looking at the structure of Opus Dei, is fascinated by it and officially authorizes its expansion. He even appoints Escrivá himself as honorary domestic prelate of the Pope, thus giving him the title of Monsignor. That title should not be underestimated, because thanks to the title of Monsignor, Escrivá can move much more freely and be more easily accepted, both by religious authorities and by civil ones. The Opus. Let's get to its structure. What is the Opus? Basically, it is a congregation, but it is a congregation that has very few consecrated members, that is, religious, and a great many lay people. Of these lay people, about 30% are celibate, while others are married. Almost all of them keep their affiliation secret. For a long time, even the various members of Opus didn't know each other. Then, little by little, also due to specific laws that prohibited secret associations, especially in Italy, the internal doctrine had to evolve. Today, a member of Opus can openly reveal himself to the public, but he cannot reveal the names of other members he knows. It's a matter of privacy, of confidentiality. But behind this confidentiality, there are issues that still raise serious questions today. Let's start with these questions then. Why has Opus Dei, during almost a century of existence, experienced so many controversies and seen so many of them? and more than one issue has been raised against it. One of these concerns the historical opposition to the Jesuits, as if they were two opposite poles of the Catholic Church. Think about it. The modern pontiff, Francesco, is a Jesuit, the first Jesuit to be appointed vicar of Christ, successor of Peter, and to wear the fisherman's ring. And yet for a long time, the members of the Society of Jesus, who were born after the Counter-Reformation and those of Opus, have looked at each other with mutual suspicion, as if one was invading the other's territory. Not so much in matters of mere theology, but in their approach both to ecclesiastical life and, above all, to public life. Then there's another issue to consider. How does recruitment for Opus Dei take place? Of course, there are no public recruitment offices. We don't see the numeraries of Opus Dei. You don't see them out on the streets like the Mormons who travel in pairs, always dressed the same, trying to spread the word of Mormon. No, in this case, recruitment for Opus Dei happens in a subtle way. Some have even described it as sectarian. And here the clash with the Jesuits comes back. In fact, the Jesuit father James Martin wrote that Opus Dei places great emphasis on recruitment. According to Martin, Escrivá himself would have told his followers, "You must kill yourselves for proselytism." All this actually casts a shadow of mystery over Opus Dei, over the cooptation of its members, and over what some critics call brainwashing, almost as if it were a real sect, like so many others. The apologists, on the other hand, reply that these are all slanders, that there is absolutely no brainwashing, and that joining is completely voluntary. And the fact that some members of Opus decide to donate their assets to the work is a result of their own spiritual journey. Then there was this policy, because Opus Dei, especially in the 1970s, supported the worst dictatorships in South America: the Chilean dictatorship, the Argentine dictatorship, the Brazilian dictatorship, and the one in Paraguay. Everywhere, there were men from Opus, not so much within the ranks of the military, but rather in civil administrations or within the clergy, who, in silence or sometimes with striking gestures, supported the dictatorships. From this point of view, it should be remembered that Escrivá came from an obscurantist and conservative society, that he himself had clashed with the Republican forces in Spain, and in short, his doctrine and his preaching were strongly marked by anti-communism. But when you stop at doctrine, where do you stop at doctrine? And at what point does all this become positivism, become secular practice? Many people ask themselves this question: how far? Opus Dei, with its policies and its ideas, how far can it go without coming into conflict with everyday life, especially with the politics of states, or worse, with criticism justly aimed at repressive dictatorships? This is a matter that is often debated, but it does not have an absolute definition. Because if there are criticisms, on the other hand, the response to the criticisms is exclusively apologetic. They talk about an Escrivá who was absolutely opposed to dictatorships. At least that's how he would have expressed himself, according to his collaborators. But there's no trace of any of this. Then there's the aspect of the personal prelature. In 1982, Pope John Paul II, Karol Wojtyla, granted Opus Dei the status of a personal prelature, the only one currently existing within the Roman Catholic Church. Within the personal prelature, the personnel, sorry for the play on words. The cleric does not answer to the pontiff, he answers to the prelate who leads the congregation. It is therefore a body within the Catholic Church, but with its own separate hierarchy. And why does this happen in 1982 or 1882? Well, here we need to go back a bit. We need to go back to the late 1960s when another pontiff, Paulo VI, rejected the first request from Opus Dei to become a personal prelature. Some historians and journalists say there was never any good blood or sympathy between Escrivá and Montini, Paulo VI. Montini, yes, had been the secretary of Pius XII, but he wanted to carry on with the approach, much more open, much more secular, much less traditionalist, launched by Giovanni XXIII. Escrivá took a completely different stance, much more determined, much more traditionalist, much more conservative. According to some journalists, at the end of the conclave that elected Pope Paul VI, Escrivá himself is said to have exclaimed, "May anyone who voted for Montini in the conclave be damned." It's a statement that has been repeated in some publications but denied in others. And we always come back to the same question: where is the truth? The truth in this case concerns Paulo VI's refusal to name Opus as a personal prelature and Giovanni Paolo II's acceptance in 1982, 7 years after the death of Escrivá, 4 years after the death of Paulo VI. Why 1982? Think about it for a moment. A year earlier, in 1981, Giovanni Paolo II suffered the famous attack in St. Peter's Square by Ali Hachka. It's something extremely turbulent, shocking. An armed man who, in the heart of Christianity, attempts the life of the Vicar of Christ. Let's not dwell in this case on how the story evolved, on the relationship that would later bind Wojtyła to his attacker, or on the visits to the prison. Let's focus on Wojtyła, who is wounded and deeply disillusioned. During that time, security and logistics for the Pope were handled by his close collaborator, Paul Casimir Marcinkus, whom we've already met. Yes, he's president of the Institute for Works of Religion. In addition to being a banker, he also takes care of organizing the Pope's trips and coordinating his security. He's a jack of all trades. But the fact that someone tried to take Wojtyła's life has shocked the Vatican circles, and it has shaken things up so much inside that it's caused a real earthquake, even in terms of alliances and rivalries. It's no secret that in the first years of Wojtyła's pontificate, there have been several upheavals. Marcinkus and Cardinal Casaroli, the Secretary of State, don't like each other. Casaroli and the Opus bishops don't like each other either. Opus takes advantage of this opening, also exploiting the attack on the Pope, to promote an image of greater security for the benefit of the Vatican itself. And it's precisely within this image of security that another shock takes place: the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano. That's where Opus intervenes again to cloak the pontiff in an aura of calm, while outside there's a storm. According to the biographers of Wojtyła, it was precisely thanks to that aura of calm that the pontiff fully resumed his duties. And in the end, he decided to reward Opus with that long-coveted personal favor, something that made the obra extremely powerful within the Catholic Church. It's something that has no precedent and to this day has no equal. What do we know about Opus today? We know the numbers. There are about 100,000 members at various levels all over the world. They are mainly concentrated in Europe and North America. They are men, but also women, and we're talking about lay people. They lead a perfectly normal life up to a certain point, but then they devote their commitment, their physical and mental resources, and sometimes even their possessions, their wealth, to the philosophy of the Opus, a philosophy that requires absolute submission to the Prelature, but also to its ideas, and that sometimes even demands sacrifices. For example, there was a stir when news broke that members of the Lotus used some self-inflicted instruments of medieval origin. One of these, the most feared, is the Silis, a kind of small hooked metal chain with inward-facing spikes to be worn on the arm or the leg, and it pierces the flesh, causing deep pain. For a long time, it was said that the use of the cilicia was just a rumor, that it was nonsense or even slander, until some members of Opus actually admitted to having used it once or more, or even on a regular basis. Others, however, stated that they had whipped themselves with a so-called discipline, a rope whip. These are bodily humiliations that take us back to the Middle Ages, to when people thought they could atone for their sins by inflicting deep wounds on themselves. And here comes another question. How far can religious faith go, and where does manipulation begin? Or, even worse, that attempt to subjugate minds to the point of making them so docile that they inflict pain on their own bodies. Of course, these members of Opus who confessed to using these instruments of mortification of the flesh said they always did so consciously, independently, and voluntarily. It's part of their creed, it's part of their personal freedoms, but in all this, I have a doubt that I hope you will allow me. Because if mortification can be part of the doctrine, of the Catholic doctrine, in the sense of wanting to diminish oneself and not exalt oneself, of course, corporal mortification in the sense of corporal punishment is something much harder to justify. And we've reached the end of this video, which is extremely complex, dedicated to Opus Dei. We reach the end with our questions. Escrivato Ebelager was beatified 25 years after his passing. According to many observers, it was a lightning fast beatification. Very fast. And here too, one has to wonder why. Opus has grown more and more. Today, as noted, it has about 100,000 members. It still remains partially shrouded in mystery for what it actually does. Not so much on a practical level, but more on a theoretical, political, and recruitment level. It's an association that raises questions and essentially offers self-referential answers. It's based on a book, The Way, written by Escrivá, almost as if it were the Cincelli Manual, or the Boy Scouts Manual, if you prefer, of Opus itself. Questions remain, which we'll summarize here. Was Escrivá really a blessed, a saint, someone who performed miracles, or was he just a reactionary priest, as he has been accused of being? Did the work come about to offer a different interpretation of the world, to create awareness among lay people, or to influence society? Was Opus Dei's involvement with the worst far-right dictatorships, starting with Francoism, just a coincidence, or did it happen in secrecy? Or was there actual complicity due to a well-defined strategy? Are Opus Dei's current positions on women, homosexuals, assisted reproduction, and the right to end of life compatible with our society and its evolution, or not? And finally, is Opus Dei as a personal prelature something useful for the Catholic Church, or is it a church within the church, as some critics have claimed? I'm not giving answers to these questions, I simply repeated them. I leave the judgment to you. Form your own opinion based on what's been reported. You can also write your opinions in the comments below this video. I still have several doubts, and these doubts lead me to further questions. I just hope that this video has also sparked in you the desire to research, to understand, to learn. We can't doubt everything. We can't doubt science, or at least what is recognized as science. You can't doubt what is documented, but you can doubt anything that has opposing facets. Not communions, but distortions. Not convergences, but divergences. That's the case with Opus Dei. Take a scale, two different pans. You have to find the balance point, the point where both pans are perfectly aligned on the same axis. At the moment we don't have it, we will find this balance point. I hope so for you. I leave it up to you to find it. My mission in this case ends here, but I hope I have still provided you with good service. Thank you.